Wow, here we are. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to NAB Day 14 for me. So, been here for many, many days, but the thing is, I'm happy to be here. It's the last day of NAB and the last day of the 3D Motion show for April. I'm your host, Matthias, aka Major VFX, on all the different platforms, and we're here at the Maxon booth, showcasing Maxon 1 and how it's used in our workflows. Not just ours, but amazing artists. And one of our amazing artists who was so kind to join us in between all of her classes and her busy schedule is an amazing ZBrush artist, Anna Carolina.
Hey. Thank you so much for having me again. I appreciate it. So, my name is Anna Hathaway. I mean, Anna Carolina Pereira. And today I'm going to show you really interesting ways to use the program ZBrush. In order to save time when you are modeling, for example, characters, mascots for your business, avatars, especially nowadays with the advent of the metaverse, right? A lot of people are looking for people to design their avatars, and normally the turnaround is pretty fast on that. So I'll be showing you some tips and tricks. Just to introduce myself, I am a technical artist and VR developer, and also a character artist. I teach at Ringling College of Art and Design, and I stream ZBrush Live for 4 years now. So I've always been teaching this stuff for a pretty long time. All right, this presentation is similar to the one I did yesterday, except I'll be sprinkling in new tips. So stay tuned if you already watched the other one, because there will be new things. So first way that I like to save time is when I'm blocking out. So I normally start with a sphere or some sort of primitive like this. Instead of using, for example, the move brush, which is a brush that just lets you push and pull like this, kind of like your work is clay, I like to use another brush called the snake hook, which lets you kind of wiggle stuff all over the place. It gives you a lot of power. With a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility. That's what I always say for this brush, right? Because it's dangerous. But as you notice, as I'm doing this, if you know anything about 3D art, you can tell that we are getting some stretching in the mesh itself, even some actual problems in my polygons. They're non-planar, they're not very usable. So what I can do is I can turn on this big S button right here to activate Sculptress Pro mode, which means that my brush now is purple, and as I pull, it's going to kind of auto-regenerate the topology. As you notice, it's triangulated, but it's amazing for blocking out, and it gives you a lot of power and a lot of speed. So for example, to create my little alien thing, I'm going to just use Sculptress and just kind of start pushing and pulling, trying to create a little face, keeping in mind that this little icon right here shows me where the front is. So I'm going to try to match that. I have been known to sculpt backwards once or twice. I'm going to change my masking to mask lasso, and what that does is whatever's masked becomes immovable. So I'm going to invert that and kind of pull down a little neck. I think that's too big. And as I go, I don't have to worry about the topology. That's one of the benefits of this kind of workflow, is that you become unrestrained by topology. You don't have to worry about that. It's all about creativity and just kind of making things happen without worrying about the technical aspects at all. To some pretty high degree, you can totally just disregard the technical aspects right now. Going to go ahead and make this a little bigger for the shoulders. Sometimes I do use the move brush. You can see that even as I smooth, it's actually updating the topology. The Sculptress Pro mode is adaptive based on the draw size. You can change that in the settings. So if I make my brush smaller, I can actually add more polygons in certain areas, which is really neat because, for example, if I want to block out the face, I might need more polygons in the face versus the body. So I'm just kind of going to continue. There's some sort of locking situation going on here. Okay. I'm going to use the move brush. The move brush gives me more control, less power, but that's actually a good thing. I like to balance the two. So I'm just kind of blocking out my little alien bust. Trying to think about where the shoulders are going to be. Mostly just kind of creating the space in order to be able to sculpt on it later. I'm going to turn off polyframe mode so I don't no longer see the frames of the polygons. I'm going to start using my other favorite brush, clay buildup, that kind of puts down clay or takes it off. And I'm just going to kind of block out where kind of the ocular structure would go for my little alien, a little bit of nose if I want to. If nothing else, I think this process is extremely fun. And, it just allows you to be creative. So as I go, I can smooth it, kind of make sure that I don't have too many polygons, and so forth. So as I work a lot with beginners and things like that as a college professor, as a mentor on the internet, and a couple of problem areas that are normally a time sink for my students is the eyelids and the mouth. I don't know if you guys have done a lot of 3D modeling and sculpting, but these can be very, very difficult to achieve. So I always tell them, first of all, do it right at the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using live booleans to block out those the mouth bag in order to be able to, for example, animate it in the future. You actually need the inside of the mouth if it's going to move at all. So I'm going to turn on live boolean. I'm going to append a sphere into my scene, make it a little smaller, kind of mouth cavity sized, I suppose. Squish it down a bit. Making sure symmetry is on. That's a good time savings tip, is to always make sure that symmetry is on if you need it. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and see these little icons right up here. These are the Boolean modes. So right now it's additive. So if I turn it to subtractive, it will automatically subtract my Boolean. And the cool thing is that while I have the sphere selected, I can totally just grab it and still sculpt on it in kind of like a subtractive way. So I know it looks a little funky. I like to say that for this one, you got to trust the process. Right? So this will allow us to have a really clean kind of mouth interior as opposed to like dragging and pulling and like trying to create it by hand. Then I'm going to do a similar aspect or similar workflow for the eyes, because creating eyelids is something that a lot of people struggle with. Whenever newbies join my mentorship, it's one of the things I tell them to do is like make some eyes, and then we do it like 4 times in a row. I'm going to append a sphere. Make it smaller, around eyelid sized. The eyelids are round because they just kind of lay over the eye anyway. Like that. And this one will be the exterior of the eyelid. So I'm going to create first the kind of the opening of the eye. So I'm going to append another cylinder. Actually, this is the first cylinder. And I'm going to rotate it. If you press down Shift, when you're rotating, it snaps. A lot of people don't know this about ZBrush. So I'm going to make it smaller, kind of move it up ahead, squish it down a little bit, and I'm going to position it through the eyelids. Turn it to subtractive and kind of just start planning out how I want the eye opening to be. If you look at it from the side, you'll notice that it's kind of like a really long, kind of unrealistic shape though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the original sphere, make it a little bit smaller, and turn that into subtractive. You can't really see it right now. I think I'm a bit too small. I can just fix that back part. Oop. Just fix that back part a little bit. Oh, it's interacting with the cylinder. You can just pull the cylinder out a little bit. Like this. And you'll see that I kind of already have, it's not the right shape, so to speak, but it's kind of got that like nice width for the eyelid itself. This stuff is really hard to make by hand. So it's kind of a nice tip and trick for you. I'm going to go ahead and go to Boolean, make Boolean mesh. And what this will do is it will create a brand new mesh for me that is this Boolean. So right now you can see I have different subtools here that are creating the Boolean. Let me see where it could be. There it is. And now it's just one subtool that is the Boolean mesh. If I turn on polyframe, you'll see that the topology has been updated to kind of merge all of these as you would expect with a normal Boolean. If I were to smooth it, you'll notice that they are all attached. The cool thing about this workflow is that it also maintains polygroups, which is basically just ZBrush's way of organizing your polygons. It doesn't really affect the end result, But it helps you with sculpting, for example, because you can isolate them easily and things like that and only affect one area. I'm going to first, before I do anything else to this, mirror it so that I have an eye on the other side. So geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld. It's not perfect. I'm going to smooth the center out a little bit. Check everything. And before I ZBrush it so that it's actually like nice topology that isn't triangulated all over the place, I'm going to go ahead and plan ahead because I know I want to close the mouth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate just the exterior, mask out with mask lasso, mask out the bottom jaw, press Ctrl W to make a new polygroup, and now I have all these polygroups set up. So you'll see where the magic happens. Is in, at least I think it's magic. In ZBrush, I'm going to say keep groups, and that will ZBrush this into a really nice workable topology with the groups already done and nice edges. So I'm going to maybe make it like 10,000 polygons, 13,000. Wait for it to do its thing. Sometimes it takes a second. It's calculating. And you see, it's been remeshed. Oh, I didn't have symmetry on. We're going to undo that and turn symmetry on. I always make sure that I have symmetry on, normally after the fact, though. So, but I try to keep track of that. There we go. That's a lot better. So now the topology is even. So you can actually tell that it's not totally perfect, but it's kind of a starting point for us. Okay, so if you ever have a ZBrush that you don't like that doesn't have perfect topology, I just recommend like undoing it and like changing the number of target polygons, and you'll be good to go. From here, what I can do is I can shift-click or Control-Shift-Click this jaw, smooth out my mask. Again, the mask basically makes it so that whatever's the darkened area can't be changed, and I'm going to just rotate this closed, start closing the jaw as much as I can. I should have left myself a little indication of where the lips were, but... So I can invert that, close, close, close. This looks a little messy, so I'm going to turn off Sculptress. And since this is at the very beginning, I don't have to worry about losing any details in this particular part of the workflow, just because, you know, it doesn't really matter. From here, I can, for example, start like blocking out where I want the lips to go, giving them a little volume, and just kind of resting easy knowing that because I have the right polygroups and I have the right structure already, geometrically speaking, I don't have to stress out about being able to, for example, work on just the bottom lip or the inside of the mouth. I can still get that if I want to, which can be pretty challenging otherwise. So that's why when we're talking about saving time, I normally tell my students, you got to kind of plan out what you're even going to do and try to question, is there a better way to do what I'm trying to do? I'm going to skip ahead. All right, so all I did after that phase was kind of using my 3 favorite brushes to block out a little bit of the anatomy, a little bit of the personality of the creature. My favorite brushes are clay buildup, which I showed earlier. They just kind of builds up clay and takes off. Move brush, of course, and then the Denian standard, which kind of is like a little knife. And I like to use it inverted to like create these like nice little cuts. I guess inverse cuts, like this. I really like those shapes. So next up, I have the array mesh and NanoMesh that I normally do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a horn, or maybe something else. I don't know. Horns. We'll do horns. What we're going to do is I'm going to append a cylinder that will be kind of, oh, that's a sphere. That will be kind of like the single parts of my horn. I'm going to keep it symmetrical because that's going to be part of the process. It's going to help me out. This will be a single part of the horn that I'm going to multiply a bunch of times in order to kind of create a really intricate looking thing in like 5 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to macro. If I can find it up here. Do you guys see? Oh, there it is. Macro. I'm going to drag it off to the side actually. And then I'm going to go ahead and say create instance subtool. So what that will do is it will copy over my subtool right here, and this one is an instance version of this. So whatever I do to the original will happen to the new one. So the original is hidden to kind of help me not lose track of where it is. I'm going to make it a little smaller, put it around where I want the horn to be. I'll try a different design from last time. Then I'm going to just duplicate it a bunch of times. So what you can do to duplicate really easily in ZBrush is press down Control and drag, and that will duplicate whatever you have selected. But if you get it to the perfect position that you want to duplicate at, let go of Control and keep dragging. It will continue to duplicate it at the exact same distance between each instance. So that's the very beginning of our horn. It's got a little bit of a wobble right there. I can fix that in the original. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to the gear. And all of these right here are deformers that you can use that are very easy. They're similar to the deformers in other software that kind of create cages that lets you move things around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say taper first, because I want the tip of the horn to be, I guess, tapered. Maybe I'll thicken out to the bottom as well. I'm going to hit the gear again. Accept. Then I'm going to hit the gear and say bend curve, and this will basically create a nice little curve with points that I can just kind of manipulate. If you take the top cone, it will add more points to your curve, so you can, like, the more points, the more control you have over the curve. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at 3 for now, and just kind of start manipulating the horn. This time I'll do a different shape, making sure that the base of the horn is at least going through into the head. If I want, I can continue to add points, and it won't reset anything, which is really handy. Oh wait, this is the same shape as last time. I'll do something else. Maybe more like goat horn. And I just have a ton of control over the pieces, and this is a lot better than like trying to manipulate this with, like, for example, the move brush. Accept. And here's where actually the real magic happens. So if whatever I did to the original mesh gets pushed down to basically the instanced version. So I'm going to go ahead and go to NanoMesh and say Edit Mesh. And this will open up kind of like a double viewport where I have the original and the new ones, and whatever I do to the original happens to all the new ones at the same time. Which gives me a lot of, like, creative control as well, because I don't have to kind of guess before I array it, so I can just kind of edit it as I go. So last time I did something like very oceany. Let's see what I can do this time. First I'm going to kind of rotate it a little bit so that it no longer has this, like, weird offset. Try and make it straight. I'm going to make the bottom parts a little bit smaller so that they kind of fit together a little bit better. I think that kind of creates more of a layered effect. This top one might need a little help later. The cool thing about this is that I can totally just divide the mesh up as I go, and it will be totally fine. Another cool things about doing it this way is that I get to keep symmetry. Even though this horn is totally asymmetrical, I can symmetrically work on this piece since it's still kind of in the center of the symmetry. So what I can do is, for example, go to Transform, activate Symmetry, Radial Counts, and this is going to be radial symmetry. You can kind of see it right there. It's in the wrong axis, so I'm going to go to Transform on the Y, like that. So whatever I want to do, it can be like radial, like this, which is really, really helpful. So let's go ahead and add some blobs. One of my favorite brushes, just the blob brush. Just make it look really organic, really fast. My smooth brush is a little strong, so I'm going to press down Space and Shift, and this is the smooth brush options. A lot of people go through like a whole like settings process to do that. You can just Space and Shift and it works. You can do that. I personally really like adding some spikes, so I don't think I'm going to resist. So I'm going to go to Curve, AccuCurve with my snake hook brush selected. What AccuCurve does is that it kind of creates a nice point for any pull that you do with the snake hook. So this time I'll make smaller spikes. It's really cool. I'm gonna put this on my TikTok. I think people would like that. You can also do detailing. So if, let's say I'm gonna divide it up a little bit more. Take my Daniel Standard, which is basically like the cutting brush, my little knife, and I'm gonna change the alpha. Every brush has alpha options. You can grab something that's more like stripy like this. It's not really applying, but it seems like it is. Like that, and I can start kind of detailing it out as I wish. This workflow is very, very powerful. Another way I like to do this is with eyeballs, so I can keep the radial symmetry when making the iris, just like really fast, just like add a bunch of strokes there, and then you get yourself like a really detailed iris. Clicked a button, give me a second. Let's reset my screen. All right, so there's my little horn. So let's move ahead. We're actually going to get a preview of the other horn that I made. Okay. The other way you can save a ton of time is by creating your own brushes, as you can imagine. So basically, anything you can do with any of the default brushes, you can make on your own. You can improve on it, so you can make it customized to whatever you want. So I'm going to show you two really cool, interesting ways to do it, and not to mention they're super easy. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new sphere. Going to make it a Polymesh 3D, divide that up, because when we're doing detail work, it's important to have plenty of topology, and otherwise it looks, lumpy instead of nice. And yesterday I did scales. I don't know what I'll do today. You guys have any ideas what I should do? I'm going to do like Beeple. I'm taking suggestions. More scales? Fox skin? Frog skin. Okay. I was like, how am I going to do the skin of a fox? I don't even know what that looks like. I'm going to reset my brush. I'm going to try to just improvise frog skin. So I'm just going to make some like big old circles or something. I think the blob brush will come in handy for this one. Like that. Wonderful. Beautiful. Divide it up more for more detail. Maybe I'll add a little bit of play build-up for texture. Okay, let's say that's the most beautiful frog skin you've ever seen, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this brush called the extractor brush. It's spelled with an X, so when you're searching for it in the brush panel, you're going to type in X. Everybody always tries an E. There's three options. Basically, it's the application method that changes. I'm going to do the extractor drag rectangle first. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll back in history to right before I started. And that's another really cool feature, by the way, is like the history bar. You can scroll back and forth in history as you need. It stores basically everything since the last time you opened it, or more, depending on how you set it up. And I'm going to control-click the history right there. You see this white marker? I'm going to go back to the present, so to speak. What this brush is going to do is it's going to calculate every change I've done since that white marker to now, and it's going to turn that into a brush. So I could have done anything in this time, and that will become the brush, so to speak. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to press down G to go into recording mode. My brush is now blue. I'm going to click and drag right in the middle. Try to make it centered. It's a little not centered. Try again, because I can tell that it cut off the bottom there. Like that. And now I can try out my brush. And it basically applies whatever changes you did. You can tell it's a little blurry on the edges. That's because of the fall off or focal shift of the brush. So if I turn that down to make the brush harder, so to speak, it kind of gets rid of that effect. I can also make it more intense, less intense, and whatever I want. So let's go ahead and apply that to my little lady. So here's the thing. We can apply that at whatever intensity we'd like. I'm going to turn it down a little. It's strong, right? Okay, let's say I send this to my clients, right, after I've done a bunch of changes, and they don't they like everything except for the frog skin. The only real option I have now is to come in here and like smooth it off or like try to sculpt it away. But that never really ends with a good result. Normally it just looks like blurry and lumpy and kind of unintentional. And I always talk about like intentionality in art. It's something that's really hard to define, but you can tell when you look at it. Does that make sense? So what you're going to do instead is you're going to work smart. And you're going to remember to use your layers. So I'm going to go ahead and go to layers, and I'm going to add a layer. Much like in Photoshop, all this layer does is it records kind of all the changes you've done to make sure, and basically all the changes you've done while the layer is recording are going to live within that layer. Let me demonstrate. So right now it says like rec for recording. I'm going to put these down. Right. I'm going to stop recording, and let's say, oh no, nobody likes these frog skins, I can just turn the layer off. And as you can tell, the mesh is identical to before I started it. I can also have a ton of control, so I can reduce the intensity of everything within that layer. I can even invert it. I can, for example, let's say I want it to be more intense. Instead of coming back here and doing it manually, I can duplicate the layer, and it will basically like add that change to it as well. So I use layers for a bunch of different scenarios. First is for detailing, and the reason why I'll show you in a second. Second is for designing. So if I'm not sure if I want to commit to a design change that I'm making, I'll put it in a layer, check the before and after, see if it looks better, if it's like half strength, things like that. And for posing as well. It's good to have like the T-pose in one layer and then the pose in a different one so that you can easily switch between the two. All right, so let's say I love these frog skins here, but I don't like this tiny one that got away right there. Like, it looks a little out of place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of, coming in here and still trying to smooth it out, even though I have a layer, I'm going to go ahead and turn the layer off temporarily and store a morph targets. It was already stored, so I deleted it and stored it again. So what this is going to do, for those of you who don't know, a morph target in a blend shape is basically the same thing. It stores all of the locations of the vertices in that exact moment when I click that button, kind of like in the state of the model. So it remembers this state of the model somewhere in memory, I guess. So what I can do is if I store it, then I can apply it. So I'm going to go back to my layers, start recording that layer again. And what I'm going to do is the ZBrush has this really cool brush called the morph brush, right there, that selectively applies your morph target to only a few locations, whichever location you're clicking. So let's say I want to get rid of that little guy. I've morph targeted it. For example, I'm going to take off all the rest. And as you can tell, this is not a smoothing brush. This is just restoring the state of the mesh in the moment I hit store morph target. It's basically magical. It lets you erase stuff without damaging anything else underneath it. So I can be selective with it. If I want, I can change the hardness of the brush and just like take off a couple of scales or something like that. Like that. So this is an extremely powerful method of working. It's also really easy to forget. So you got to put a little post-it note up that says, use layers. Otherwise you'll forget. I'm always checking if my students are doing it, and it's almost never what I want to hear. So next, I'm going to teach you about the next way, and probably one of the most powerful ways to make a brush that you have in ZBrush, which is to make a VDM brush. It's called a vector displacement mesh brush. And basically, it allows you to create alphas, but alphas that are 3D, that have underhangs. It's quite interesting. Let me demonstrate. So I'm going to take some of the pre-made ones they have. For example, Chisel 3D. And you can see up here, these are all the VDMs we have. So for example, if I want like alien, let me make Polymesh 3D. Alien mouth like this, I can just drag it in. And this is just a brush. It's basically an alpha that has 3D information in it. So we've got like a dog nose that we can do. Elf ear. That's upside down. There it is. So if you build a library of these things, you can save a ton of time in the future. It doesn't really change topology or anything. It just stretches it out. So to make your own VDM brush, first you need to start off with a plane. Make sure it's a perfect plane. Then I'm going to make Polymesh 3D. Go to geometry, let's turn on polyframe just so I can see. Right now it's just one big polygon, so I'm going to divide it a bunch of times. If I divide it like this, it's going to smooth it out because smoothing is turned on. So a lot of people don't know. You can just turn that off, divide up a bunch of times, and then you will maintain your perfect plane. Let's see, it's still too low, so there, that looks good. So what should I do for this character? Last time I did a big old spike. What should I do? Allie? Teeth? Teeth? Okay, we can do teeth. I'll just do one big like fang or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn symmetry back on. Grab my mask pen brush, which is a little easier. Mask out where I want my big old tooth to come out of. The only thing is that like I didn't plan the mouth to have teeth, so we're gonna have to put the tooth somewhere else. Just somewhere else on the body. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a deformer, and I'm going to say inflate balloon. Oop, I should probably invert my mask. Inflate balloon, inflate again. And this is another menu that you need to get used to using if you want to save time, because all of these sliders create kind of like global effects on the entire unmasked mesh. So you can do just about anything, like for example, gravity. Like if I want to give it a little gravity, I can do that, and things like that. There's even a contrast slider, actually, which is really neat. Let me show you that real fast. So if I want to turn up contrast, I should probably be in a layer recording mode. I already am. What it does is like it basically creates more contrast in your work. You can also take it down and like reduce the contrast. Super useful for somebody like me. I actually used it before I got here. This is a little too much, but because I have like a really light hand, so I'm always like working really like tiny changes. So then I just put on the contrast light and I'm like, okay, good, this is done. So let's go back here. And I'm going to try my best to create a little tooth. Oh no. I guess that kind of looks like a tooth, right? Let's lower topologies. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. I'm gonna use my pinch brush that I haven't shown, but basically it just pinches everything that you're working on. Puts the vertices closer together. Oh. It's got a little stretching, but we're just going to call it character for that. So technical difficulties. My keyboard seems to not be responsive. Seems that it has like a little walk icon that's like glowing. Sorry.
So while we work out these technical difficulties, are we back?
We're back.
Thank you, Matt.
Turn it off and on again? Okay. So I'm going to just kind of give it a little bit of texture with my clay buildup. Maybe I'll invert my mask a little bit and like kind of try to give it the effect of like being coming out of a gum or something. My inflate brush. It's a little raggedy. Okay. The thing about VDM brushes is that it takes the entire plane into consideration once you make it. That means that any little change you do to the plane, be it like a little scratch up here or whatever, will become part of the brush and create artifacts in your work. Make sure that any part that you don't want to affect the final mesh is perfectly straight. If you do on accident mess up with the plane, what you can do is you can mask out the parts that you do intend of keeping. Invert it. Go to a few lower subdivision. I'm going to save just in case. And then, once that's done, I'm going to go to deformers again. And I'm going to say morph to grid. And this will literally morph your topology back into a perfect grid. So now it should be theoretically a perfect grid if I masked it all correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my chisel brush. Look at it from the front. I sometimes like to take perspective off, which just kind of creates a little bit of skewing in the brush. So just turn perspective off. Look at it from the way you want it to be perceived. And then go to Create in the brush panel. All of your brush creation is in here. And create from Mesh right there. And you can see that my little fang has been added to the options up here. Let's go back to my alien. I'm going to create a new layer. I should probably name these. So, little fang. Then we can just go ahead and apply our little fang anywhere we'd like. So, don't really have a plan for these fangs. I'm just going to put them up here. Looks like a punk rocker now, a little bit. I feel this goes without mentioning to some degree, but it's still important. If you're wanting to work fast, make these brushes and save them out as well. You can save out any brush by going to the brush right here, brush options, and then hovering down to where you see load brush, that you can like download brushes from the internet or open up your old brushes that you saved. Just hit save as, and you can import it into ZBrush at any time. A lot of people make a ton of like passive income just selling the brushes that they made on the internet as well. There's a lot you can do. So definitely save out your brushes so that you can use them later, because it's almost like the kit bashing of the character art worlds. All right. So I'm going to stop recording that layer, and we are going to move ahead to the little necklace. And turn that off. So another way to create in very interesting brushes is called IMM. So basically it takes whatever mesh you already have and it turns it into a kind of mesh that you can insert. So I'm going to go ahead and get a brand new sphere going. I'm going to make Polymesh 3D, this important step. I'm going to do something like a little bit more wonky to this one, just so that it's more recognizable. Like that. And I'm going to turn this into a bead for a necklace. So what happens when you do an IMM is that you can just use this and drag it and drop it anywhere. So I'm going to demonstrate by creating insert mesh right here. New. And then I can drag it on and just do that. So this is extremely powerful for like accessories, if you want to do like earrings, if you want to do hard surface stuff. Paul had a great talk on something like this on Sunday. But basically he was just dragging on like handles for his cars and things like that. When combined with the tool I showed earlier, Boolean, you can do some crazy, crazy stuff. So definitely try it out. So I'm going to go ahead and append another shape, maybe a helix this time. Feeling fancy, I guess. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is, instead of create insert mesh, I'm going to say create insert multi-mesh. What this is going to do is it's going to automatically kind of take all the subtools I have, even if I had like a ton of them, and create a brush out of that. So I can apply either one. The cool thing is that if I go to stroke, curve mode, I can now apply these in a curve mode. So watch this. Woo. So basically it's being applied along the curve, and I can edit the curve afterwards as well. Gives you a lot of really interesting power. You can randomize the two. So I'm going to go to modifiers right here in the brush palette. Select the first one. Right here where it says variations, I'm going to turn it to 2 because I have 2 variations right now. And variation selector, it's a slider, but basically it changes the selection of the variations, right? So 0 is static, 1 cycle forward, 2 cycle backward, and 3 is random. So I'm going to turn it to 3 to randomize. And do that again. And when we got the starts of a really cool necklace. You can do a lot of stuff with this. I just taught one of my mentees how to do like mechanical cables that had like a plug on the side, so it was like the plug for electricity, the cable, and then like the other side it had the electronic itself. So you can do a lot of good stuff with this, and I highly recommend trying it out. I'm going to just make sure that snap is turned on, making sure everything looks good. I'm going to lock starts, and I'm going to try to apply it to my little model as her little necklace. The size of the brush changes the size of the mesh that's applied. So let me go ahead and bake the layers. Oops. So the size of the brush affects the size of the objects that are being placed. So if I make my brush smaller, I'll get smaller objects. Another cool thing is that I can kind of change the size, for example, and a bunch of other features by just changing the draw size ahead of time. So if I make it really big, I can change the one that I've already placed. If I make it really small, I can change it like that. So I'm going to try to apply it to her real fast. Oh, looks like I have like symmetry on. I had a little snapping problem with this one yesterday as well. Basically, you can just place the little necklace on. click off the curve and just kind of move it. We're going to pretend that it has a backside, just for the purposes of this presentation. And there we have it. So this is extremely powerful. I love the randomization. You can randomize just about anything as well. I've seen people do it with alphas and VDMs, and they just apply it all over the place. Randomized, it's very powerful. Next, and to kind of wrap up, I'm going to show you guys some tips about painting in ZBrush. So ZBrush has this feature called Polypaint that basically applies per vertex. It's like vertex painting. It doesn't need UVs or anything like that, more technical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this doesn't have layers. I'm going to bake them all for a second. You can use Polypaint with layers. You just got to make sure you follow a few rules. For example, if you bake them, you got to make sure that you're not recording. And a couple of things like that can make people a little confused sometimes. So I'm going to start by kind of putting down a base layer of paints. What color should I make her? Last time I did it, I was green, so no green. Pink? Pink and yellow, okay. So I'm going to choose a yellowish color. Not too saturated, hopefully. I'm going to choose my paintbrush right up there and paint it on. If I want to save time, I can go to Color, Fill Object, and it will kind of just fill the whole thing. Then I'll pick my pinkish color. Is that good? Is that pink enough? And then just kind of fill out kind of the areas where I planned on having that extra color. Kind of like this color combo, actually. Maybe a little on the nose. A little bit on the lips. Okay. I'm going to also go ahead and change the alpha on this, and that's a great way to get kind of a skin feel. I'm going to maybe get one of these like more dotty alphas. Maybe choose a slightly darker pink and just put it on. I don't know if you guys can tell. Oops. But basically it starts to create this like spotty effect that helps it break up the skin a little. Because at the end of the day, organic modeling is about imperfection, I think. Right? Anything that's organic is imperfect by default. So you gotta really embrace that to get a good effect. Forgive me rotating all over the place. All right. So the real trick, that was just kind of like setting the stage for color. The real trick is using smart masking, basically auto masking, to create some really neat effects. So for example, I want to highlight all of the spikes on her body with a different color. So I'm going to go to masking, mask peaks and valleys. I'm going to click that. And it'll automatically try to find all the peaks on my model and mask that out. So you can actually get some control by changing the range and the coverage. I'm going to make the range a little higher. Hit that again, maybe a little bit higher. And now I'm starting to get like black masks over the little scales I had applied ahead of time and the big spikes. If I invert that and I paint it maybe a darker like pink thing, turn off my alpha, paint it on, check. An important part of this is checking, right? It's way too strong. So I'm going to undo that, maybe turn my RGB intensity down. That's how intense the RGB color is being applied. And then try again. I'm always checking between. Like that. And we're starting to get some cool effects that work really fast. I wouldn't say this is like the finished paint job, but it's pretty good for kind of a first pass, that's for sure. Like that. So we got little spots and things like that. And for the necklace, what color should the necklace be? Silver. Now, you went fancy with it. Okay. So in order to achieve silver in ZBrush, we're going to use matte caps. They comes with a lot of kind of preset materials that you can see that kind of just reflect light in different ways. For example, we got gold. When you change the matte caps, it automatically changes it for the whole model as long as there's not already some other matte cap applied. So maybe, oh, that's cool. What's a good one? Reflected map is silverish. We can do this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a necklace. Make sure it's selected. And I'm going to change my paintbrush from RGB mode, which is color, to M for material channel. And I'm going to paint on that silver. It can be a little confusing because everything that doesn't have a material already applied to it turns silver as well. But once I choose my other default material, whatever I haven't specifically applied the material to will go back to normal, and the silver will stay in the necklace, like that. So for painting the necklace, I really like using the... I'm not going to paint a lot because after all, it's silver. But I'm going to go to masking and mask by smoothness, and that should theoretically mask out just the smoothest areas. I can maybe paint those like black or something. And don't forget to turn the material mode off. RGB, color, fill object. You can kind of, it's very discreet. You can kind of tell a slight color shift. Yeah, the silver kind of gets rid of all the color variation here. Then I'm going to mask by peaks and valleys. And theoretically, let's go ahead and take off the silver temporarily. Oh, it's pretty cool, actually. I accidentally forgot to unmask, and then I took off the material only on the unmasked parts. Let's leave it like that. I like that. Happy little accidents, right? All right. That looks cooler than the original. I like that. We can just kind of finish up the paint job with some, like, you know, manual touches. Maybe I always like adding kind of dark colors around the eyes. I think that it really highlights. Oh, I should probably turn RGB mode back on. I think it highlights a little bit. It's maybe too much. Like that. You can do all sorts of other cool masks and like try things out. So like mask by ambient occlusion will kind of get like those ambient occlusion shadows, and you can kind of paint those in darker or with red if you want to kind of fake blood flow to the face. You can do mask by smoothness. Could get you some neat effects. I could, like, if I wanted to like highlight these even more, I could invert that and like choose them maybe like a lighter color. Paint those in. Highlight those. And you can kind of preview what it's going to look like by the mask, right? You can see that the dark parts are where you're not going to paint, and the light parts are where you are going to. So let's highlight those even better. I know some people that get a lot of good results by doing something like this, but painting in kind of like the inside of the wrinkles dark. So maybe if I do that again, invert, paint it dark color, kind of like get some neat effects like that. It's almost getting Borderlands-y. Like that. And there's a lot you can explore. So I highly recommend, like, when you get your hands on a model that has enough peaks and valleys, playing around with all of these. You can even mask by color, mask by polypaints. And one last trick for polypainting, because I still have 2 minutes left, is you can actually adjust polypaint after you've already applied it. So I applied this, I can go to Polypaint, adjust colors, it creates a new viewport right here, and I can change, for example, the saturation. Looks cool, like on black and white. That's the hue. Oh, that's not the hue. So we can kind of change the colors and do a lot of iteration this way as well. So definitely use this. I normally find that I have to just up the saturation in whatever I do, because I tend to go for like grayer colors most of the time. So I just know that about myself, so I'm always overcompensating with the paints. All right. I believe that is it for today's presentation. Hooray! Ooh, I always forget about these up here.
All right. We have time for live audience questions. And we have a live audience member, Matt Milstead from MoGraph.com. You have a question for Anna Carolina, please.
Is there an advantage to using the clay buildup brush versus like the standard brush?
So the question is there an advantage for the clay buildup brush over the standard?
It's just a vibe, you know. It's a feeling thing, you know. So let me show you. So the standard brush, it's got this more like of a smooth effect, right? It's more circular, you know, very nice, good control. You can make some really nice veins and stuff out of this. The clay buildup, it's like the square version of that. It's like super hard, and you know, it normally takes a lot of handling to get right. I don't know exactly when I switched over to using the clay buildup, but now it's my favorite brush. So like it just makes me feel like I'm actually working with clay. It creates these like imperfections that I really like that sometimes can make it to the end model that look really natural, better than something way too smooth. This one actually I find that it can get a little blobby compared to the clay buildup. Like I just have trouble measuring kind of like the roundness of it all. You know, if I do it a lot, like it starts like they don't like merge together super well for me. You see how I'm like getting that blob effect? But this also leaves like straight lines, so you got to be smoothing when you use the clay buildup normally. That's just personal preference. What I do to the standard brush is I do use it all the time, but this is my brush that I use as like kind of like my guinea pig. Every time I want to do anything interesting with the brush, I use the standard brush and then I upgrade it, so to speak, and then save it out.
So do you start with a clay buildup and just smooth then?
Yeah,
Just
normally.
constantly back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
More questions from the audience. In the back. Oh, the
What?
workflow for animation.
So, let's see. In ZBrush, you can do a lot of the preparation that goes into animating something. So you can do, for example, the retopology that it would take for create like nice deformable edge loops and things like that. However, it's not really an animator tool, so you would just export this into your chosen animation software.
Come over
and
to
then rig
Cinema.
it. Yeah. And then rig it and then animate it.
All right, in the front.
I know a lot of people polypaint for like concept art, but if you were going to bring it in for like a game or a movie, what would you be your workflow to work that out?
Yeah, so the question was in regards to the workflow for movie assets, right? Or games.
Yeah. So again, Polypaint is basically vertex data. So if you want to export this, you're going to have to get that vertex data normally into a map. So there are UVing tools in ZBrush that you can like UV it and export the map out. Like so once the UV is in place, I don't have one unfortunately, but basically I can go to texture right here and create, and it's grayed out because I don't have a UV, but it says new from Polypaints, for example. So it would export that as texture that I could easily use in the game engine, and you can actually export all sorts of maps from here, like displacement, normal, things like that, as well.
How easy is creating it?
So the question is, how easy is it to create a UV map?
So in ZBrush, I think the most common process is totally automatic. So like you just kind of tell it like where you don't want your scenes, so you just paint on like I don't want my scenes here. This is kind of a heavy model, so I think at first I would like go to a lower subdivision. If you want, I can show it. Do I have time?
Yeah,
for
you
that?
got time. Go for it.
So let's go to a lower version. Z plugin, UV master. I have a practice of saving before I do large operations, especially in a high poly model. That's just in case. So Z plugin, unwrap. So if I wanted to, I could just hit unwrap and it would unwrap for me. So let's do that. It's unwrapping each poly group. Let it think, let it do its thing. Yay. So let's check out the UV mask. So I can just go right here and say morph UV, and it'll basically like, so the seam and
Wow.
the seam ended up being right on the face, right? So that's not what we want. We normally want to hide the seam back and like behind the face. Also, look at that. It looks like
It's artwork.
yeah.
Is that the mouth? Is it now have a tongue?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the inside of the mouth that's come out. Yes. So there are tools to actually gain some control over the automatic process. So basically, for example, you can enable control painting. So let's go ahead and obey the warning. So work on clone. It will basically create a clone of the model that we can UV, and then it will bring the UVs back to the other one. Then, turn my material normal. So what I'm going to do now is enable control painting, and protect will let me kind of try to paint on. And this is like, you're just kind of giving it a hint, like, hey, please don't UV right here. Don't seam this. And then you can try again. So it's an automatic process. So normally it takes a couple of tries. If you have good polygroups, which is something I do all the time, so like since this model has nice polygroups, I can just hit polygroups and it will like take the edges of the polygroups and turn those into islands too. It's really nice. Unwrap, let's see. Oh, it protected the this little mouth. It protected the face this time, not perfectly yet, but if I made the painting a little bit better, it would work. So that's just a way to kind of see the UVs. FYI, like free extra tip, you can sculpt on this in the morph UV version, and then it will apply to whenever you come back. So, woo, do stuff like that. I believe it'll be there. There it is.
Wow.
Okay.
That's very cool. Any other questions from the live audience? Well, guess what? The internet has a bajillion questions. Good job, internet. You're very active this morning on my most tired day. Good job. You guys did great. Thank you. All right. So can you resize the work area for sculpting in ZBrush, and can you make it open that way? So as far as the area for sculpting, or are you just zooming and moving the camera?
So automatically here, we had the whole document open already. So like I can work in this whole viewport area. I think what they mean is that sometimes when you open ZBrush by default, the document area will be smaller, right in the middle. So what I do, and I do this every time actually, I just go to new document, and it literally opens a new document that's already the right size.
Wait, what do you mean automatically?
So like, it automatically,
it's automatically the right size. No matter what you're making, it's automatically the right size.
Yeah, because it knows kind of the scale of the
so as
window.
you crop in, if you crop into anything.
So you want me to restart ZBrush and I can show you?
No, it's fine. But they were wondering if you could set it so it always opens to that framing and that size.
I think if you, like, before you open any models or anything, if you do new document and then save a startup doc, that should take care of that, I think. I haven't done it myself, though. It's a good question, though. I should do that. Save time.
But there you go. All right, moving on. Next question. Is there a way to paint something like scales that dramatically change size and direction as you paint them? So I guess some type of randomization of size and rotation.
So
is that kind of like an airbrush style painting?
So if you use the spray settings for the stroke, it will adjust the rotation and location. I'm not sure about the size. I've never looked into it, but I'm imagining that, yes, you could do that. So let me pull up my little scale. That's not the right one. So this is I made frog skin today.
Yeah, frog skin.
Just remembered the frog skin. So let's see. I think in here, in the modifiers, there would be an option. I've just never done it before. I don't think I can like go exploring now.
Not exploring. but it'd probably be in the spray.
If it's in here, it will be in the modifiers, in the brush.
In the brush modifiers.
Brush modifiers is where
awesome.
It'll be.
Somebody was wondering how you create cloth in ZBrush. Do you use cloth brushes?
Yeah, so ZBrush has cloth simulation built in, which is really nice. Basically, you just, I don't know if I have those.
Give it a shot. That's
Give it a shot.
Ellie, you don't mind, right?
Impromptu meeting. Okay, so let's open up yet another sphere. I'm going to make that into a Polymesh 3D. I'm going to append a plane, which will be my my cloth. Boop. Make sure that is nice and so divided. So this is ideally going to fall on the sphere and the form. So let's make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to divide it a few times because the more divided, there. I'm going to leave it round. That's cool. The more you divide it, the more detail you're going to get in the formation, I suppose. Whenever I'm doing it, I like to go to geometry dynamic subdivision and turn it on. So basically, this is a different kind of subdivision from before, which has a bunch of cool other options that I can show next time I come to NAB.
I'll bring you back.
So I'm going to just turn on dynamic thickness, and it'll just kind of like add a little bit of thickness to my cloth. Might be too much. But basically, the cool thing about this thickness is that, and this is a pro tip for those of you who use ZBrush, no matter what I do to this edge, the thickness will never change because it's dynamic. So I'm not going to like lose that thickness in any case. Let's say it's never going to compress, for example. So I'm going to leave that like that. And I'm going to go to Dynamics. I'm going to open that on the side, makes it easier for me to see it. And we can do like run simulation and things like that. I'm going to try hitting run simulation just on its own and see what happens. I'm not sure if it's automatic. No, it's not. Cancel. Let's see. On mask. Somewhere in here there's a button that says that it needs to collision volumes. There it is. Let's see. Oh, there it is. It's stretching a little bit. The default settings kind of make it stretch a little.
It's more like a latex.
And then it's colliding with the floor. So if I wanted to, I could escape, undo, turn off the floor collision so that it kind of like falls like a little ghost, I guess. We can change the firmness of the cloth, which I think is going to be necessary. There's like a bunch of options like inflate and whatnot, so I can run the simulation again.
Now, can you dynamically change the thickness once it's applied?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
So like that. Let's just pretend that that's what I want. So I'll just stop it. You can stop it by just hitting escape or clicking on it, and it pauses the simulation exactly there. And there are built-in cloth brushes that are really neat. So I'm going to go to C for cloth. There's like cloth dimple, cloth fold, cloth hook, inflate. Let's try cloth hook. And it kind of like in real time kind of
runs the simulation,
runs the
as you
simulation
said. Oh,
in that
wow.
spot. Yeah. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. I've seen people do like full-on monsters with this as well.
Cloth monster.
Cloth monster. Like that. And it's still, you've noticed it's not going through the sphere. It's still colliding with the sphere.
Oh, okay. So
It's still
it
in there.
respects the collision the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's super cool.
It respects all the settings you set here. So all this is still valid.
That's awesome. I like that. All right. How long did it take you to become proficient in ZBrush?
Define proficiency, right?
I guess when you were comfortable to use it professionally.
So I'd say maybe like 6 months or so. But I was practicing every day because once I found about ZBrush, I became a little bit obsessed.
As you should.
As I
Rightfully
should.
so.
It literally changed my whole career path. I was going to be a concept artist before this, so yeah. All it took was one day in ZBrush to
And
change my
now
career
you're a
path.
ZBrush artist. Love it. All right. Someone is wondering, can you save IMM or direct or draw react brushes
Yeah,
from the hair system in ZBrush?
from the hair system.
That's what they say.
I don't know what
don't know
hair
what that
system
is.
they're referring to. There's like
So-
multiple hair systems that you can do.
So can you save IMM or draw react brushes? Let's just start with that.
Just the same as you would any. So like I did that IMM earlier with the little spring, right? I can select that. I can just save as.
Boom.
And it will
Done.
save it as a brush preset. And it should open in anybody's ZBrush, really.
Awesome. All right. Somebody's wondering where they can buy your brushes. Do you have some?
No, I don't.
She doesn't have them. Sorry. Well, now you have a home project.
I normally give them for free when I'm doing classes. Like if I'm using a brush, I'll give all of them for free for my students and mentors and mentees and things like that.
Somebody was asking about the UVs, but we actually covered that. So if you missed that, go ahead and go back. Somebody is wondering, can you pull the back of the necklace to sit above the skin? Yes, you can do that.
I don't know if you noticed, but there was no back of the necklace. That's why I didn't. Wasn't
there we go.
showing. Just did the fronts. Just a little showbiz, I guess.
Yeah,
Just a
there we
little-
go. Yeah, that's it. Whatever's facing the camera. All right, so how long did it take to become familiar with the menus and options? So just getting familiar with the interface. I think that's one of the big things that people are most concerned with. It feels intimidating if you haven't worked in it before.
I like to say that it's like stepping into like the cockpit of a plane, you
Yep.
know, because it's like buttons everywhere. It's a little overwhelming. So the trick to becoming familiar with all of those menus is to just embrace the fact that odds are you don't need most of this. Like just create the workflow that works for you, and then just add a little bit more as you go, little by little. And that's something that I always talk to beginners, like, don't get overwhelmed. You only need to know 5 things to finish a model, right? Like how to rotate zoom, 3 brushes, and how to save is probably the things you need to know to create an actual full model on your first day. Right?
That sounds way more reasonable. Look at that. All right. Let's see. Is there a way to export the texture paint without unwrapping the model?
I believe there is. It's not really part of my workflow, but I believe, especially there's plugins out there that do all sorts of stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Can you bring this the model in C4D and show how to retopo for rigging? At another time. Yes, I'm sure she could show that. All right, let's see here. Question, is it possible to learn, practice ZBrush using a mouse? I think you covered this yesterday.
Yeah, covered it yesterday. I cover it every day of my life, though, to be fair. No. I mean, possible, yes. Nobody's going to arrest you for that. You know what I mean? But the thing about...
ZBrush police don't get you?
ZBrush police. I'm still working on putting that together. So the difference between using a mouse and a tablet is very simple. The mouse only has 2 settings, on and off, so the pressure is either 0 or 100%. That's it. Click, it's on. Unclicked, it's off, right? Whereas the pen actually has pressure sensitivity. So you can press harder or softly. Sometimes you even have rotation compared to how your hand is laying on the tablet. So for example, if I come in here with my clay buildup, my trusted clay buildup, and I press really lightly, you can see that it was a light effect. But if I press really hard, you can see that it's a harder effect. And this actually gives you insane amounts of control that you wouldn't get with the mouse. Things with the mouse tend to look really blocky and
hard surface.
I guess
only.
more unintentional, like I was saying earlier.
Very cool. Well, that is it. Anna is streaming all the time, right? You stream pretty much all the time. So definitely check her out. We're going to wrap up here. We're going to take a quick break and get Chris all set up for Rocket Lasso Live so we'll be able to ask questions, interact. So internet, get ready, get your questions ready. Thank you, everybody. Please stay tuned. We'll be back with our next presenter, Chris Schmidt.
Yeah.